My name is Josh Falcon. I'm an anthropologist. I teach at Florida International University and also State University of New York. My talk today kind of stems from when I was first invited to the symposium. I decided to look back at dissertation research that I had done, look back at people that I had spoken with before, and kind of created a small little mini survey to share with us for today. And I kind of tried to get most people's experiences and how they relate to Catholicism. So what I'm going to be talking about for a little while is kind of the survey details, recruitment strategies and questions. Then I'll give a little bit of information about the demographics. I'll spend more time talking about the phenomenology when people experienced something that was related to Catholicism in their psychedelic experiences, if they did, and also the beliefs. Do they continue to maintain Catholic beliefs? Do they not? And then I just have some concluding remarks and areas for future research. So the main purpose I tried to design this survey around was capturing how people identified with Catholicism, if they still did, after their psychedelic experiences. So I kind of made two really quick social media posts and shared them, and kind of they were shared by others, kind of a snowball sampling. And I also shared to two Facebook groups, one that I had ran before when I was a student, and another one that's part of this Miami Entheogenic Society that actually is housed within Moksha Art Gallery in Miami. And that's been a place where they've tried to work on decriminalization efforts and things like that. The questions I asked people were basically just, what was their history of upbringing in the Catholic Church, what psychedelic substances they had experiences with, if any of those experiences were related to Catholicism in any way, if they continue to maintain Catholic beliefs today, and then the last two questions were about legality. Should the Catholic Church be involved in legalizing psychedelics? And what are people's current stance on the legalization? So 2/3 of the people that filled out my small survey were female, a third were male. Over half of them were between 30 and 44 years old. This was, I think, a little bit more revealing of my population in South Florida and Miami in particular. And these categories, I didn't, they were self-identified categories, so I didn't throw anybody into a box. Over 3/4 of people were identified as Hispanic, Latino, or Latina, smaller percentages for white and mixed race. And this was asked at the end of my survey, which I thought was kind of interesting, if people still identified with Catholicism. And to my surprise, almost a third of people still did, right? And even after having psychedelic experiences, and the other one that ranked just as high was no affiliation, and to a lesser extent, agnosticism, spirituality, atheism. And most of the people had actually experiences with mushrooms. 80% of them reported having experiences with mushrooms. To a lesser extent, LSD, DMT, ketamine, and MDMA. And so getting into some of the better stuff, right? Some of the reports. So when I asked people about their history in the Catholic community, there was different responses. Some people had been deeply involved, others had been moderately involved, others had minimal involvement as adults. For those that said they had a deep Catholic upbringing, it may have been since they were born, kindergarten, all through school, throughout high school. Others were raised in very conservative Catholic families. One participant told me that they were from Colombia and that they had been involved with all the intricacies of the church with their grandparents. I had others that said they started going to church when they were younger, but they kind of fell off later on in their life. And I had one person actually tell me that they've dipped back into Catholicism, even though they weren't really into it as a child. So phenomenologically, I think this is one of the more fascinating parts to me. A lot of people didn't have an experience related to Catholicism, but for those that did, here are some of the quotes, right? One person said they were coming down from their mushroom trip and they felt very heavy, and they said, quote, "I felt like Jesus walking around carrying a heavy weight." In a more illustrative example, perhaps, I had another person experienced mushrooms and they encountered Jesus. And they said, "I vividly remember seeing Jesus." And they saw Jesus in a desert. He was tall with brown skin, long wavy hair. And they didn't communicate with Jesus, but they conveyed to them that he was watching over me and told me that I was on the right path, doing the right thing. He turned and began walking away slowly, and he disappeared into the horizon of the desert. I was left with an overwhelming sense of warmth, trust, and support. The feeling of being held, cared for, and protected, something that's nearly impossible to put into words, lingered with me. Since then, my relationship with Jesus, though I don't consider myself Catholic, is stronger than ever. That memory remains the most profound and valuable religious experience I've ever had. Another person also encountered Jesus, saw Jesus on a cliff or a plateau overlooking an open terrain, dressed all in white. They said that they were reminded of that Sacred Heart Jesus that a lot of grandmothers put on their refrigerator, at least in Miami. I also recall a message, or what seemed like a message, that I was also God. Not in like this grandiose or hubristic way, but that I had the infinite potential of God within me, and that in that sense, I was like Jesus, or I had what Jesus possessed. And another person told me that in the phenomenology of their experience, their entire belief system had changed. They said, I realized that God is within all of us, in nature, in animals, in the universe as a whole. God is love, which is something that some people have said earlier in here, and therefore we are all gods because we all have the ability to love. And then they also said something I thought was interesting. They said, overall, I realized that I can be with God without needing to be religious or going to church to prove anything. And then obviously I had people that said, no, my belief in eclectic spirituality has nothing to do with Catholicism. I don't think my Catholic experience, I don't think Catholicism was part of my psychedelic experience in any way. So I did have people say that. Another question that I thought was especially pertinent to this panel was people's current beliefs. Do they still identify with Catholicism? Do they still maintain any beliefs related to Catholicism? And to my surprise, a lot of people did, right? And some people said, yes, I'm still Catholic, but I don't go to church as much. Or I do consider myself Catholic, but I don't go to church. They would say I'm a bad Catholic. Some people said that they were spiritual, but not Catholic. Another example is, I do not consider myself Catholic. However, I relate to some values that are preached within Catholicism, like forgiveness, charity, or helping the poor. Those ideas, like turning the other cheek instead of fighting back. I had someone else tell me, I don't consider myself Catholic by any means, and I'm actually quite hostile to the idea. Strangely enough, I do find the ritual space created during Catholic ceremonies to be valuable to a certain degree. When I asked people if the Catholic Church should be involved in legalization efforts, at least half of the participants told me no. Some of the reasons for that, they said, I don't think they should support a legal framework because I think the church will focus on controlling experiences rather than allowing people to freely experience what they're meant to experience, and therefore limiting the benefits of psychedelics. Another person told me, not really, I think the Catholic Church is somewhat incongruent with psychedelics. Most Christians and Catholics condone drug use except alcohol, and they maintain religious hierarchies and dogmatic beliefs that are hostile to alternatives. And then I had about 40% of people tell me that they actually supported it. And what the reasons were was they thought that, sure, if it can help people, help open up people's eyes to the unknown and God, and also, sure, if it could possibly bring a deeper connection to their spiritual practices and prayers. On legality, everybody thought psychedelics should be legal, right? The reasons differed a little bit. Some people thought there should be some guardrails. These experiences aren't for everyone, not everyone's ready. But everyone by and large thought psychedelics should be legal, at least in the small sample that I have. And so, even though these responses are kind of preliminary, I think that they kind of set the stage for maybe further exploration and maybe some of my future research, even though I haven't delved into religion so much so far. And so I think what the responses highlight is the diverse ways in which individuals reconcile their Catholic backgrounds with their psychedelic experiences. While some see psychedelics as a means of deepening their spirituality, others view them as a departure from traditional religious beliefs. Most respondents support the legalization of psychedelics, with some advocating for regulation. And there's a division on whether the Catholic Church should endorse psychedelics, with concern about institutional control over spiritual experiences. There's a lot of ambivalence, people that believe in Jesus, but they don't identify with Catholicism, people that identify with Catholicism, people that don't identify with Catholicism, but they still maintain some beliefs. Some people that believe that their experiences with psychedelics actually affirmed certain practices, like going to church, or commandments or morals or values. And people are kind of on the fence of the Catholic Church supporting legalization. So even though this is just very preliminary research, I think that in the future I would like to kind of look at first, how are people actually describing, what are they actually saying, weakened or strengthened their faith in Catholicism from their psychedelic experience? What kind of incompatibilities they believe exist, where are these points of conflict? And then I would really like to explore the phenomenology. These Jesus experiences were pretty cool to read. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you.